Paradox don't care about balance. There. I said it. I think a lot of the focus trees that were designed for Hearts of Iron 4 were kind of made in a vacuum, made for the features that were present at the time, and weren't really viewed with the broader game in mind. So let's break this down. That's right. This is the paint meta. Welcome to that. There's 3 main resources in Hearts of Iron 4. Resource number 1, factories of all kinds. The next resource is manpower. And the third resource is resources. We'll drop a few of them here. Is a droplet of the black gold, the tungstens, and definitely the most important item of all, the steels. And this is it. This isn't in most games of Hearts of Iron 4. These are the 3 main resources you will juggle. Now, I'll admit there are a few others. For instance, political power is a good secondary as one. But I think for the most part, the main reason for your conquests and blobbing and semi-quasi-world conquests or world conquests is to obtain these resources. Line. There we go. The triangle. This is art, boys. Enjoy it. Soak it up. So let's run off a few nations in the game and say what these nations lack of and the reason why they need to do their conquests and to expand. So for instance, let's start off with Japan. Now, Japan has a fantastic amount of manpower. Honestly, it's one of the highest manpowers in the game. Not only do the home islands have a lot of manpower, but top that off as well, you can slip onto extensive conscription pretty early game too, because you're a fascist. And also, if you look into the focus tree for Japan, you got the option here for an extra 2.5% recruitable. Now, you could argue that you're losing that anyway, because you're going on total mobilization, losing the 3%. But overall, that means you're getting total mobilization without any downsides. So more industry and no kind of downside to the amount of recruitable manpower. Overall, Japan has a lot of manpower. So, tick. So it has manpower. Now, factories. Now, you could argue to a certain degree, Japan's industry at the very start of the game is relatively weak. Germany starts with 69 factories. Japan starts with 50. The Soviet Union starts with 83. USA starts off with 162. Man, USA strong. The United Kingdom starts with 63. You kind of get the idea. Japan, for the most part, when it comes down to the majors, it is relatively weaker when it comes down to the amount of factories it's got. So it has kind of a reason to build up and gain extra strength. However, you have got some factories with your puppets as well, and you have got easy access into China as well, which gains you a lot of extra industry. So I suppose for the most part, it really doesn't have the industry. And third, and finally, Japan, that we can all agree on, has a lack of resources. The lack of aluminium, the lack of, you could even argue they've got a lack of steel and tungsten based on the amount of industry you're going to eventually get. Probably the only resource that they don't lack at the very start of the game is steel. But then if you build up a reasonable industry, you will run out of steel as well. Definitely, rubber's a problem, and definitely oil is definitely a problem. So definitely, you do not have these 2 things. So let's move back to balance here then. So where am I getting at with this? For the most part, Japan has a great focus tree. And the reason why is you invade China. And with China, you have access to a lot of resources. Not only is there a lot down here, but there's also the bits dipping around as well. But you also have options based on its focus tree to extract more resources from China. Develop the Chinese resources. So not only does it unlock more aluminium, which you lack, so you're gaining more what you need to expand and what you need to expand your industry, but also you get options to unlock more prospect for resources inside the regions that you've conquered. So the nation starts off with not a lot of a said resource, but then you've got the option to expand into that resource later on by using your focus tree. So in a way, what's happening is your focus tree is providing you with what you need to fulfill your war industry, which I think is a really good example of balancing. Japan potentially could be one of the most powerful nations in the world, but it has a lack of resources of practically everything. And of course, the biggest thing they lack is the rubber and the oil, which gives them the reason and the examples why they want to do the conquest. Historical game. So when it comes down to industry itself, though, when we look at the focus tree, do they have a lot of focuses that give a lot of industry? So I guess what we've got to begin with is do the historical path and have a little quick look. So it gives you extra construction for mills and civies, which is good because then it fulfills that loss of that industry. Plus you get an extra 2 civs with this one. You're getting war economy to boost the production of military factories. Then you're getting total mob, which is giving you extra construction for your military factories. Then as well, you're getting this focus, which gives you a massive 4 mills as well. You know, for the most part, I think the focus tree for Japan is so close to perfect when it comes down to the historical path. We're ignoring the other paths. We'll talk about the ones later. But you can see now, if we take into account the focus tree, you can fulfill the needs of Japan over time by going down the focus path. It's almost like the focus tree fulfills the things that you are lacking of Japan. So Japan is a really great example of where maybe accidentally PDX balanced Japan so it fulfills its historical needs, which accidentally fulfills the game mechanics as well. Let's pick another example. Should we do that? Another one? Let's pick one that I don't think is as good. China! Oh my goodness. China, you are a big boy, about to get a lot bigger if you play your cards right. Okay, so first of all, let's look at manpower. So China, most populous nation in the game. You have no issues with manpower. Manpower is definitely ding, 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 going just fine. So next we'll look at factories for China. Now China starts off with a massive amount of 33, which is pretty big for a minor power. And then you've got access to all the warlords. And if you unify, you have more factories than Japan's, which is kind of the idea, isn't it? China is weaker when it's divided. I'm going to say no, because you don't have the industry to begin with, but the potential is there. And then finally, the resources. Once again, slightly lacking on resources. However, you have got lots of options to prospect for resources within your nation, which I believe is actually in your focus tree. You can also get it by going for the excavation text as well. Anyway, regardless, it's kind of a no. Once again, we're really back to the original point here. Why was this a video about balance when you're talking about the resources that nations need? Well, if the focus tree is done correctly, which is by my definition, by the way, not PDX's definition, the nation should gain the things it's lacking through focus tree to balance that nation, to make it almost feel rewarding that you're getting those said resources that you are missing as a part of the Hearts of Iron 4 mechanic. So let's look at one thing here. Let's start off with factories. So factories is a no-brainer. Yeah, you have the potential to be a major world power as China by gobbling up all your warlords. And you do have the option to do that. So, for instance, if you go the historical path, you form the Chinese United Front, which you're not really eating the neighbors up. However, if you defeat the Japanese, you eventually get to gobble them all up, and you can do that by the bottom part of the focus tree. There you go. One China policy, which gives you the ability to declare war on them. So what's happening here is you've got the option to expand your industry by gobbling up the warlords, which then gains you more of that industry. So therefore, in the long run, you fulfill what you're lacking, which in this case is industry. So through focuses, you can actually achieve a really good industry as China. And as I mentioned to you earlier, to a lesser degree compared to Japan, you've got the option to go for the excavation text and excavate more land out of China and get access to more resources. So for the most part, you got it going on here. Now, this is the part where the focus tree, I think, takes a bad turn. Manpower. Now, you already have manpower as China. You've got practically too much manpower. In all fairness, I think China needs some kind of mechanic where you can use decisions, like, for instance, blowing the dam in the yellow dikes here, and you use manpower as the resource to do that. But of course, there's kind of like connotations baked into that. You know, you sacrificing manpower to do a said thing. As you can imagine, if you use your imagination, you can think of what's happening there. And of course, probably that's the reason why the Paradox don't want to enter that area. A little bit of side note, we are talking about manpower, but here you've got access to the welfare system, the inflation system of China, which starts out kind of bad, but then you can fix it with the inflation system. So once again, there are parts and mechanics in the focus tree that fix the problem that the nation has. So therefore, you can lower your consumer goods and get access to loads of bonuses. I thought it was just a side note. Anyway, back to manpower. Okay, another side note. We're going all the sideways here. You can subjugate the warlords too, which fulfills this requirement of factories. Once again, another opportunity to subjugate the warlords, to get access to their manpower, to later integrate them. And you even get decisions by spending political power to integrate them quicker. So once again, it all comes in a big circle. It benefits you more what you're lacking. So it's a satisfying payoff as a part of your focus tree. So back to what we're talking about. Manpower, forced conscription. So remember, most populous nation in the world, option for the most manpower possible. You have an option to increase your recruitable population by 2%. Why does this exist? What am I actually gaining by going for this? You already have unlimited manpower, practically. So from a balancing perspective, why would you give a nation that it already has too much of anyway? What would be the reason behind that? It's not even like you can use manpower as a different resource, a different currency for something else other than putting troops into your armed forces and your garrisons. There is no other use for manpower. So what is the point of this? So this is where, from my perspective, this is a balancing failure. Because once again, you don't want to give a nation something it has a lot of. You want to give a nation something it's lacking of to fulfill its nation's needs And even from a historical standpoint, what would the point of giving you more manpower when you've already got unlimited anyway? It just doesn't even make sense. Now, I will argue this is almost like the classic fun versus historical. So if you think historical, you can understand there was a lot of conscription stuff going on in China at the time. Maybe reluctance to go to war, maybe and defend the homeland. Maybe. From a historical perspective, it makes sense. But from a fun perspective, why would you give manpower to a nation that already has too much of it? You want to give it what it actually needs to fulfill its defense against Japan. One thing I will say as well, just as a side note, I'm bashing the Chinese focus tree here, but these mechanics here of giving you loads of factories, but increasing your inflation at the same time is a really, really cool mechanic. And I'm really surprised they didn't implement this into more nations, because I think it's just a cool concept. The idea of funding your war industry, but it spikes your inflation. I think that's really cool. Once again, it comes back to that balancing act you've got to make to try and fulfill your war industry, but not kind of like make your economy tip on its side, you know? I think it's funny too, you've even got ineffective bureaucracy, minus 35% recruitable population factor, and that still gives you 2.78 million. Once again, from a balance perspective here, it just doesn't make sense. So there's no incentive for the player to ever get rid of ineffective bureaucracy. When I get rid of it, I'm just going to get access to another million manpower. I've still got unlimited manpower, so what's the point? So, coming back to my trifecta here, this is a straight up no. Once again, I don't see the purpose of giving something you've already got. I don't want to repeat myself again, but you get where I'm going with this. Should we do another nation? Maybe another 2 more. Let's pick a more of an unusual nation. One that I've not kind of thought about in advance. So let's go for Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is a satisfying nation to play as because you've got a lot of problems internally. The stability sucks. You've got political power problems. You've got production problems. So I feel like it's quite satisfying to fix your nation's problems, but then you've got also easy access to conquest to your nearby neighbors, which feels very satisfying to play as. And it's the reason why I always say this over and over again. Death and Dishonor is a really good expansion. Not only because the focus trees feel like they give really good rewards, you've also got lots of neighbors that you can gobble up, which, once again, painting the map is what Hearts of Iron 4 is all about. So first of all, Yugoslavia starts off with 17 factories. No doubt about it, you are lacking industry. Resources. You've got access to a substantial amount of aluminium. That's a good air industry. Also, a decent amount of chromium, which is a resource that is sadly massively underused in Hearts of Iron 4. It kind of makes me wonder sometimes whether they should add this to some random bunch of units in game, like maybe convoys or maybe trains, maybe just to have it actually used in the game, because at the moment it's just a resource that sits there and does nothing. Anyway, side note, maybe we'll make a video on that someday. Now, the main resource in Hearts of Iron 4 that is kind of the building block of kind of all your main primary equipment is steel, because it makes up infantry equipment, tanks, practically everything, to be honest with you. And you definitely have a lack of that. So steel is a problem. Next up, manpower. I can say wholeheartedly, even though you're on volunteer only and you've got 23k manpower, mostly Yugoslavia has bad manpower too. So this is why I think balancing is important for making focus trees and building fun nations in Hearts of Iron 4. So everyone lean in right now, particularly modders who are making national focuses for nations and stuff. I'm about to give you the secret of how to make fun focus trees, because Paradox have hit it on the head here. Yugoslavia is such a good example. So, taking into account political power and stability, which is really bad for Yugoslavia, but funnily enough, within the focus tree did get fixed. I guess that would be the 4th thing, wouldn't it? It'd be war support, stability, and political power, but the 4th one. Anyway, regardless of that, let's talk about the 4 things. So first of all, resources. You have the access to more steel for Serbian steel. Now let's just do research all and just see if there's any other prospect for resources in Yugoslavia. There isn't. That really sucks. So I'll be honest with you, it kind of partially gives you some steel, which is a resource you need a lot of, and 16 amount of steel is a handsome amount as well. So credit to the devs there. They are actually giving you the resource you need the most of. However, for the most part, it's really not enough. Let's argue, though, your neighbors nearby you do have a lot of resources you could gobble up. So you don't really want to take Hungary because you've already got enough aluminium. Steel-wise, no, there's not really any steel nearby. You get oil from Romania, but oil is kind of a resource you need to build a bigger economy. Like the small ones need the steel to begin with, then you start to work towards airplanes, which is aluminium and then rubber, and then chromium's at the very, very top. So no, there's not really. So what I'm basically saying is, can you gain the resources through focus tree, or can you gain it through expansion of your neighbors? And both of that one is kind of a no. You do gain a bit of steel, but apart from that, no. So I kind of want to say that they kind of tried here, but once again, you need to be able to give more resources, particularly the primary resources, which in most cases is going to be steel. And then there's the secondary resource would be tungsten to make your artillery. Okay, next up, we have factories. So 2 factors here. we have to take into account mills and civs. So civs, we gain 3 from this path. We gain 3 mills from this path. There's another option for another 2 here. There's another option for another 1, 2 mills here. And there's also an option down here. I think for the most part, you do gain enough factories, part of your focus tree, to actually make it worthwhile to build your industry up. So this is actually a really cool opportunity to develop your industry. Cherry on top here is you have access to your neighbors. And your neighbors have got decent amount of factories too. So expansion will reward you with a bigger industry. And there's no doubt about it here. This is a straight up yes. I can imagine what you're probably saying right now is, well, a lot of these are kind of up to interpretation. But I think for the most part, Balkans nations and their neighbors and the ability to expand within those nations and gain access to those factories should be a factor as a part of the ability to balance the nation and gain you more of those resources that you need. One thing I did spot that I had missed was these two. Rare minerals, so access to tungsten, very useful. The chromium, not so much. And also this one here, the access to oil, which is kind of useful, not massively though. Once again, I'm still going to stick with my original decision here. It has a small impact on the contribution to resources, but not massive. Then finally, manpower. So once again, manpower is not very good for Yugoslavia, but you've got access to a few spicy bits and pieces. So first of all, local militias give an extra 2% recruitable here, which is open to the Western focus and the Soviet Union path. So both paths can do this. Extra 2% is massive, really is massive. Also, all Yugoslavian regiments, if you go for the fascist path, you can go that one deep down there. Once again, 1% is not massive. But because it's so far down the focus tree, it's one of those moments where I kind of desperately need a little bit extra recruitable, and it'd be nice just to give a little bit of extra to kind of keep the war effort going, which is kind of cool. What's beautiful about the manpower thing for Yugoslavia is they're keeping it relatively historical. You've got the option to do mass recruitment through extra focuses. However, it doesn't give you a ridiculous amount. It doesn't give you a huge amount. You're not like swarmed with a huge amount of manpower as you can, let's say, as some of the Spanish paths, for instance, which give you like up to like 8% extra recruitable pop. So for the most part, this is definitely a yes. It definitely meets that need and that requirement. Taking a step back for a second, the option to expand to your neighbors is definitely more of an option when you go down the Tito path, because you've got the ability to kind of bring people into your faction and potentially expand into them because they're a communist ideology, so no one will guarantee them. So in that circumstance, you've got a lot of opportunities to expand. And nothing's stopping you from going communist or fascist and manually justifying. Who doesn't like that too? I think this is a success story. This actually shows an example of a focus tree that fulfills the needs of the nation, which adds more fun and also allows you to bounce towards giving you what you need the most. I understand there's been a lot of repetition in this video. Very sorry. Okay, I'm going to show the worst of the worst now. The big daddy, the biggest failure when it comes down to balancing Hearts of Iron 4. The nation that I bang on about every single day that it needs a massive nerf. And that is the United States. Before we proceed, let us do my Doctor Strange thing and look into the future and make a prediction what you guys are going to say in the comments. So you're going to say, America was strong, America was powerful, America needs to be really strong. Agreed. I don't disagree with you. I agree with you. But when historical comes in, I lean more towards fun. And I think fun needs balancing to make it a fun computer game. It is a computer game, by the way. This is not a historical simulation. It is a computer game. USA. You start off with 178 factories. Wow! Resources. You have practically everything apart from rubber, which is great because it's almost like the devs have understood that. I know from a historical perspective, they don't have rubber as well. However, you do get access to all resources you need, but you don't actually have rubber. And if they wanted to, let's just say if they really wanted to, they could have popped for more rubber in the Philippines. But from a balancing perspective, that means USA has everything. So what's its incentive to join the war? What does it actually need to gain? Why would you need to trade with other nations? There's no reason to trade. Just isolate yourself from the rest of the world. Oh, by the way, that's historical. I don't care. It's a game. So definitely resources are through the roof. I mean, you just have so much of them too. Even when you take into account, let's just say you build all your mills and whatnot, look at the excess resources you've got. 1,000 oil, 250 aluminium, almost 200 tungsten, almost 750 iron. An insane amount of oil and iron. I never even knew this, but Great Depression reduces your resource gain efficiency by 20%. That needs to be so much higher. That needs to be like 80%. Anyway, manpower. Guys, we have a full army here of 350k. It's not the biggest army in the world, but it's still pretty hefty. You're on Disarmed Nation, by the way, and you have 273,000 manpower. There's no doubt about it. Manpower for the United States is never a problem. There's no time I played USA and thought to myself, oh, I need more manpower. That's never been the case. You go on extensive conscription, you're practically going to have a few million manpower, so it's never going to be a problem. Once again, manpower is sorted. So, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say the resources that America don't have aren't one of these three. It's war support and political power, the two main resources for the United States. And to be honest, I do actually agree with you, even though they do play a lesser impact overall in the game itself. The biggest problem when it comes down to is the actual United States focus tree. So, first things first, getting rid of your Great Depression, even though I don't think Great Depression is even that bad, is just too easy. You just press these focuses. I personally think you need more support for senators and representatives to actually pass them. I feel like they're way too easy to pass. They've had artificial speed bumps here by saying you can only go for this focus once every 230 days. But once again, it still doesn't make a massive impact overall. It feels kind of like they need America to join the war to get rid of the Great Depression and not the opposite way around. You know what I mean? So it feels like you're incentivized to join the war as early as you can, get rid of Great Depression, just from a balancing perspective for America, just to slow them down. So America has unlimited factories, right? So why would you just, in this case, give them this, which gives them a ridiculous amount of naval dockyards and military factories? And you've also got this one, the projects here, giving 3 mils as well. And you've also got this one, military construction, giving you an absolutely crap ton of infrastructure and 5 mils as well. The point I'm getting at is it's rewarding you with more factories, even though you've got the most factories in the game. They're just kind of like building on the mountain of factories that you get as USA. It feels like it gains more than it actually needs. It kind of feels like Great Depression needs to be worse, and it also needs to reduce construction speed overall. You could argue that this is going to make the game more boring because you just sat on your hands as USA and you've not really got much to do. But at the end of the day, USA is just so pummelingly strong. It's so brutally strong. What other options have you got? So, gives you more factories. Resources, I will say, though, the focus tree doesn't give you more, but you do have access to a lot of excavation tech as well, which is based on these decisions. Oh, I'm totally wrong. You gain so many. Wouldn't it make more sense if USA started off with like 50% less resources and it had to excavate more to build its industry up for war? It just kind of feels like it gives you all the resources in the game immediately, and you're not really even incentivized to do these. I understand in multiplayer, aluminium runs out as a world resource at some point, so you are incentivized as the United States to go for the excavation for aluminium. That's quite a popular MP tactic. But from a single player perspective, you are not incentivized to click any of these because you have as much resources than you're ever going to need. So resources, you are spoilt rotten. And manpower. So you've got a lot of manpower, and through focus trees, you do have the access to more manpower. And it is kind of the communist path. So I suppose, would you even include this? An extra 2% recruitable here. And also full desegregation, which gives extra 20% on top of everything else you've already got. So 20% on top of your 100%. Does that make sense? It just doesn't make sense to me, this. Why would you reward the player with more than what it already has? I understand you want to give flavor to the communist path, but it just feels kind of like you're adding more to the mountain of manpower that they've already got. Which comes back to my original point. It's the reason why I think the United States needs to be brutally nerfed from just a balancing perspective. It's not all doom or gloom, though. I think the USA focus tree does what it needs. So it limits your ability to go for certain focuses, meaning you need support in the Senate and the House of Representatives, which I think is a really cool mechanic. However, I will say it'd be kind of cool if you increase that a little bit more. That'd be kind of cool, right? Push it a little bit higher, the requirements, so it's a little bit harder to do. Kind of reflecting that the Americans do not support this war. But for the most part, you just spam the lobbying button over and over again until you gain support, and then you can just press it anyway. There is a way that Paradox could go in the wrong direction with the USA focus tree. For instance, if they set artificial date limits for certain focuses, I think that's a bad direction because it limits the player's ability to play sandbox style and play how they prefer. I just think that some of the options that you've got are a little bit cheap and are easy to get access to, and I feel like need to be more rewarding because they're harder to access. So there we go. You gain unlimited manpower as USA, and you gain more manpower to top it off as well if you go communist as well. Damn. I will say from my perspective, I don't think the USA focus tree is the worst focus tree. I just think USA needs to be nerfed more. The explosion of its economy should only really occur like maybe a few years into the war. The economic miracle shouldn't happen from 1936 onwards. In conclusion, if you are designing a focus tree and you're a modder, my advice to you is limit one of these 3 resources. Limit the player's access to them. And then, as a part of the focus tree, reward the player either through directly giving them resources or manpower or factories, or give them access to conquests that will reward them with these said pieces of equipment, these ones. I understand from a historical perspective, certain nations such as miners might still have limitations on how much access to manpower they might have, and also have a limitation of how much labor they may have, so they limit their factories. But if you want to make the focus tree as fun as possible, from a game perspective, my advice is this is how you should make focus trees. Please tell me in the comments how much you disagree with me. Guys, I hope you have a good day. And if you want access to more of this kind of content, click on this video here. I love you. Goodbye.